So, you clicked on this video because you wanted to know the history behind Stratum Automotive, how we got started, and pretty much everything I can think of conceivable related to the history of the shop. This is going to be a pretty long video. I got a page and a half worth of notes related to the timeline because I don't think you can properly start halfway through the timeline. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning. And hopefully I don't miss anything. I thought about this video for over a month and made notes about random stepping stones along the way that I wanted to include in the video. I have a brother named Paul. He runs Technician Red on YouTube. Him and I grew up together. He's my full brother. He's 16 months younger than me. I'm currently 33 years old in 2025. So growing up, a lot of times we would spend most of the summer at my grandfather's house in Waco, Texas. And my grandfather, he was not a mechanic by trade or anything, but he knew how to turn wrenches, and he had a 400-acre farm or ranch, I guess. He raised cattle just as a hobby more than anything. And that's more or less where my brother and I started picking up turning wrenches, because he got lawnmowers given to him that had the roofs crushed from trees falling on them. And so we'd take the decks off of them and we'd go drive them through the pasture. And naturally we would break them, or the carburetors would gum up from sitting all summer. We did that for a few years, just working on lawnmowers, got go-karts, started into that, just little single wheel drive go-karts, nothing special there. But we once again broke them and had to fix them. And then that evolved into working on trucks. I got my first truck from my great-grandmother. She had an old Ford. It was a 1980 F100 that was sitting in a pasture, and it hadn't been running probably a decade. It had an old 302 with a C4, and it's two-wheel drive, and I got that truck when I was about 13. I just pulled it out of the pasture and told Grandpa I wanted to get it running so I could have a truck to drive around the pasture instead of a lawnmower. So we put battery in it, rebuilt the carburetor, plugs and wires and all that, and I just beat the absolute snot out of that thing, and I would break it and I'd have to fix it, and that's pretty much where I started learning turning wrenches on trucks. My grandfather's the one that taught me to drive. He'd put me on his lap coming home from town, and he'd let me steer the steering wheel. I was probably 5 years old. He'd let me drive the tractor hauling hay to the cattle and stuff. So that's where I got the bug to be into automotive stuff and fixing things. My dad, he was a gearhead from conception, much like myself, but my mom and my dad got divorced when I was about 8 years old, right as I was really starting to get into enjoying, learning. And I think that took a lot of time away from my father with the ability to kind of like go down to his shop building. Because my dad, where I grew up in San Antonio, my dad had 45 acres and he had a few shop buildings, which helped immensely with my ability to turn wrenches on these project vehicles that I had. So we had the farm out in Waco that was my grandfather's, and that's where we had the lawnmowers and go-karts and trucks. And then back home in San Antonio, my dad had the 45 acres with the shop building and tools. And I pulled an old truck out of the weeds there that was a 77 Chevy K10, and my dad told me that it needed a timing chain, and I had no idea what the hell a timing chain was at probably, I think I was 13. Yeah, I was 13 years old when I started working on that truck. And I called my grandpa, who once again lived 4 hours away in Waco. I said, "Grandpa, what's a timing chain?" And this was before YouTube. So all I had was like paper shop manuals that my dad had. Grandpa walked me step by step through how to change a timing chain over the phone. I got the truck running after doing the timing chain job, but the motor was pretty weak, and we decided to pull it out, and I took that 350 up to my grandfather's house the summer I turned 14, and my grandfather and I rebuilt that motor. Nothing special, just had the local machine shop was like, "Hey, I got these pistons, it'll be like 10-to-1 compression, and we could put some 202 valves in these old cylinder heads." And I was like over the moon happy. I was like, "Hell yeah." And then my grandpa said he had an RV cam, so we put that son of a gun in there, and I had me a little 200 horse small block. I thought I was on top of the world. But My grandfather and I rebuilt that ourselves. That was the first engine I ever rebuilt, was that 350. And everything went pretty well on that. But getting back to my dad, so my dad loved turning wrenches. He had a 69 Camaro in high school or college or something like that with a big block in it. But like I said, him and my mom got divorced when I was like 8 years old. And my dad started his own CPA firm and then met my stepmom. And so they had their own thing going on. And my dad and I didn't really get a lot of time to bond turning wrenches. My dad always had 100 irons in the fire at all times growing up. So we did spend a lot of time together. It just wasn't turning wrenches. We were helping his friends remodel buildings and building my dad's own. He's got a game room that's almost the size of my shop building here. But my dad having that shop building down there where I grew up was a huge influence in what I do now, because had I not had access to the shop and the tools, and I'm not sure that my life would be the same as it is today. So I'm extremely grateful for that. Then I got into high school, and my sophomore year, I joined the tractor team, which I was the first sophomore they ever let join the tractor restoration team. And I loved doing that. We got to do body work and welding and rebuild engines and see how transmissions work. And so I did that my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And I think it was my senior year that we restored my great grandfather's 53 Massey Harris. My dad still has that tractor. He funded the project. We did all the work. Turned out pretty good. So I guess one thing that I did with that 77 Chevy K10 when I was 16 years old, so this was my junior summer in high school, I took that truck, and it was a half-ton Chevy long bed on 33-inch mud tires, and I should have left it that way, but every kid wants more. And so I bought a set of 3/4 ton axles, thinking that those 3/4 tons were going to be the answer to my problems. Like, I was just like, had to have bigger tires. So I put it on 36-inch military tires. Well, I didn't know any better as a child, but 3/4 ton front axle is the same strength as a half ton. It just has 8 lugs. And so I put these bigger tires on there and went to beat the snot out of it, and immediately started breaking axle shafts just every time I drive the thing. And so I just got this wild hair to put 20-ton Rockwells in it. A friend of mine sent me a link and was like, dude, you need to buy these. And the price was right, because who in the hell needs 20-ton Rockwells? And it was like $900. Well, you couldn't even buy a Dana 60, so a 1-ton front axle for my truck was like $1,200 back then. And so I managed to scrape up $900 and went and bought these axles. And I put this 77 K10 on 20-ton Rockwells. And that was a lot of work, and it was too big to fit into the shop building, so we had to build it out underneath, like, the trees in the dirt. And that taught me a lot about fabrication. And I took that to the local. We had a place down here called, well, they still are around. There's a park down here called Outlaws Mudfest, and at least 2 times a year they have an event, and you can go out there and mud bog through the mud pits and stuff. And that's where I started enjoying trucks, was going out there and just having fun in the mud. I promise there's a point to all this stuff, right? Throughout high school, I owned quite a few project trucks, but I never had any money to work on them, so I would go through them quickly. I'd buy one, I'd get bored with it. I didn't have any money to modify it, so I'd sell it to fund the next project. And so then I got into college, and I never wanted to go to college, but my dad told me, you're going to go to college. I didn't have a choice about it. I was 17 years old, and I sent my resume to Texas A&M and Texas Tech, and I was like, man, I love building stuff, so I guess I'll go to be an engineer, you know? My dad told me if I wanted to be a mechanic that I would starve, and all he ever wanted was the best for me. So I tried to go the route that I thought would make him happy. And so I went to engineering school, and my heart just wasn't in it because I didn't enjoy doing it. After 3 years, 3 long years, I decided to drop out of engineering school, which was the scariest thing I ever did in my life, because my father, up until that point, had always controlled everything I'd ever done. And so I dropped out of engineering school and drove home, moved out of my parents' house, and bought a like, I think I paid $2,000 for it. It was a rundown 34-foot travel trailer. We had to put tarps on the roof. Oh man, it was terrible. It would rain outside, and at the same time it'd be raining inside because the roof was so bad. And that was some rough living there. But I found a friend of a friend that had some property in town, and he let me live out there rent free as long as I helped him out with some of his projects he had going on. And I lived there for a couple of years. But when I went to get a job after I dropped out of college, I didn't have any interviewing skills, and I didn't really have too much previous work experience. My first job was my first automotive related job, I'll say that, was, I believe, my junior summer. I worked for a company called Midway Automotive. They had a machine shop in the back, and when I would take engine cylinder heads and stuff in there, I would walk through the mechanic shop, which was a separate business. And me and the owner of the mechanic shop got to talking, and he was like, "Would you like to work for me during the summertime as part-time help?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds really cool." And so that's where I started cutting my teeth on actually being a professional mechanic, was working there. Where was I going with this? So yeah, I worked there during the summers when I was in college. Then when I dropped out of college, I didn't really want to go work there because I needed more money than what they were paying me. So I started applying in the oil field, but I didn't have any previous job experience with the oil field, and I wanted to work on big trucks, work on whatever there was mechanic wise, but there was an abundance of qualified workers at the time, and I never actually got a job in the oil field turning wrenches. I didn't have any job interviewing abilities because I'd only ever had the one job prior, and it was offered to me. I didn't have to apply for it. So I got a job in the oil field installing level sensors in the tanks. So they got these big oil tanks on these sites that are 16, 20 foot tall, 24 foot tall. And we would put these level sensors down in there, and they had stainless steel tubes that went down in the tank, and then they had floats with magnets in them, and they would float on top of the water and the oil. And then you would drop a sensor down in there, and it'd pick up on where those magnets are at. And I worked at that place for 2 years, and it seemed like a lifetime because it was miserable work, shit pay. I think I made $11 an hour, and the the company didn't care about its employees at the end of the day, and that's why we ended up splitting up. But I remember that we had a problem where these level sensors they called it spiking. And so if you had a 16-foot tank, these level sensors would spike and show 18 feet of fluid. And so naturally, the system would see that one of the tanks is overflowing, and it would shut the well down. And there was a couple of instances where these guys are in what they call flowback, and I guess they just punched the hole in the ground. They're getting all kinds of oil out of the ground, and then our system shut the well down, and then it never came back to what it was doing before. I wanted to figure out why the system was doing that, and the engineers that made the system were from Mexico. And so they came up from Mexico, and they drove around, and they were like, "Oh, we can't find anything wrong with any of the sites. Like, y'all are just doing something wrong or whatever." And at this point, I'd been with the company for going on 2 years. I told my boss at the time, I was like, "Hey, I can make this thing jump and spike right here in the shop. We don't have to go out to the site. I can do it right here." And the engineers, they didn't care. They didn't want to hear it. They went back to Mexico, and I was just like, "Man, I don't want to continue to look like an ass because the company I work for doesn't care." So it was at that point that I really decided I need to start looking for a new career path because this place wasn't going to be it. And I was tired of working the oil field hours. We would work 70, 80-hour weeks, be on call on the weekends, and you just didn't have a life outside of working. And so a friend of mine and my best man at my wedding, Nathan Reagan, he was working as a lube tech at the local Ford dealer. And he's like, "Man, I talked to the head diesel guy over there, the shop foreman, and he said he'd like to meet you." So I took off a day from work and went up there and met this guy named Keith Dunford. And that's really where my life changed, was in meeting that guy, because Keith cared about the product he provided. He was very intelligent and just an overall good dude to be around. And so he was the shop foreman. I think we had 8 or 10 bays, 5 or 6 legitimate diesel technicians at the shop, and I just came in as a peon. I remember my first day working in the diesel shop. I was supposed to be just Keith's helper, and I went up to one of the other technicians. I'm like, hey, how can I help? Because I wanted to be like, you know, I just want to get my foot in the door. And Keith hadn't showed up yet to work that day. And so I was like, hey, I don't want to stand around doing nothing. So I'm going to go ask one of these other guys, can I help him? And all these guys that I'm talking about in this video are really good friends of mine now, but they really doubted me back then. Gosh, I was 21 years old, working at the Ford dealer, just started in the diesel shop, went to help one of the guys. And I said, hey, how do I drain the, you know, they were like, drain the radiator. You just turn this little valve and it'll pull out. And on the Fords, when you turn the valve, it's not like a threaded bolt where it breaks loose and then it spins out freely. It turns like 45 degrees, and then when you start really having to put some pressure on it, and then it'll turn another 45 degrees, and that's when the plug actually starts coming out of the radiator. Well, I turned it that first 45 degrees, and water hadn't started coming out yet, and I told the guys, like, man, this thing, I feel like I'm going to break it. And one of the other technicians was like, see, I don't know why they hire these idiots. They don't know, you know, they don't know their asshole from their elbow kind of thing. He's just not going to be anything. He's a nobody, you know, more or less. And I'm like, damn, this dude don't know me. I'm just trying not to break a potentially $400 or $500 radiator. And so it took a little bit of proving myself to get to where these guys said, hey, this guy's not a complete idiot. I'd show up to work early and I'd take out their oil buckets and I'd sweep their bays up. And I just tried my best to make sure that everybody in that shop was happy and I was doing as much as I possibly could. And Keith started turning me on to doing side work. So he would have some customers that didn't necessarily want to run their truck through the shop, or he had some personal projects that he wanted done. And I was working, I made an extra, I think, $1 an hour. I think I was making $12 an hour working for the Ford dealer. And Keith was like, yeah, I'll pay you $20 an hour or whatever. Or I'll pay you X. Keith would have his projects and he'd be like, hey, I'll pay you X amount of dollars to do this job after work. And so I'd hang out after work and get this job done under the table and start making a little bit of side cash. And Keith always paid really well to get these projects done. Everything was going pretty good at the Ford dealer. I had no intentions of leaving until I decided that I needed to buy my own place. So here I am making $12 an hour, and I'd been at the Ford dealer for, golly, good thing I didn't freak out. I'd been at the Ford dealer. I don't remember how long I worked at the Ford dealer. It was less than a year, probably 7 or 8 months, just enough to where I'd started getting comfortable with my position. And they wanted to switch me to flag time, which, if you're not familiar with how technicians get paid, it's you get paid by the hours you produce. And I was really worried about that because I wasn't a very good technician at the time. I didn't know anything. I hadn't gone to any school for technician work, and we're not working on small block Chevrolets. We're working on very intricate power strokes. And so I was really worried that flag time was going to make it to where I didn't make any money and I couldn't afford to, like, I was already barely scraping by. And I'm like, they're going to keep me at $12 an hour, but they're going to make me work flag time. And I'm like, I think this is going to be where I need to find another place to work. I run across this property where we're sitting, which was, it was getting foreclosed on. And I called, there was a bunch of signs on the gate because my in-laws and my girlfriend at the time lived, and she's my wife now. She lived at the end of this county road, and I drove past this place all the time. It had been abandoned for the entirety of our relationship, which at that point, I don't even know. Let's just say I'd been driving past this place for at least 3 years at this point, and it had been abandoned for a very long time prior to that because there was mesquite trees in the driveway. The house was run down. It was pretty bad shape. But there's a bunch of foreclosure signs all over the gate, and it had a bunch of phone numbers on it, and I called every one of them, and I got that nobody, either the numbers were disconnected or nobody knew anything about the property. So I figured, well, you know, I'm not going to be able to figure out who owns this. And so I was sitting there shooting the shit with my landlord at the time. Remember the guy I was living on his place for free with my beautiful travel trailer with the holes in the roof. And I was telling him, I was like, man, I found this place, but I can't get a hold of the lady. And I was telling him where it was at, and he's like, I got her phone number. And so I call this guy, or it was a girl. I call this lady, and she ends up telling me that she'll take what she owes on the place, which was just a phenomenal deal for me because it was just shy 8 acres, had a double wide from like 95 or 96 on it, and it even had like a little 1-bay wooden shack. It was very run down. but she ended up saying she'd take $55,000 for it. I really need to know when. Let's see. Okay, I'm really bad at math. I wanted to give you all a timeline for what this looked. I probably bought this place in 2015, if I had to guess. And the lady was just like, I don't know how close she was to financial ruin from this or whatever, but she had to get out from under it in a hurry. And so she took the $55,000 that she owed. And my dad sat me down and was just like, Ryan, you got X amount of income and you got X amount of bills with this house that you want to buy, and you're in a negative, you need more money. And I'm like, shoot. It just so happened that my old boss from that summertime gig was looking for a full-time hand, and he called me and he offered me $15 an hour, which was $3 more than I was making at the dealer, and it wasn't flag time. You get paid from the second you clock in to the second you clock out. And so that was a lot more appealing to me, was $15 an hour and regular pay versus $12 an hour at flag time. And so I break the news to my boss, Keith, and I'm like, dude, I love working for you. It's been the best experience of my life, but I really think that this is my opportunity to achieve what I want, which is buying this property, and I can't have a question mark for my paycheck. I didn't want to tell Keith that I was only going to be getting paid $15 an hour because I felt like that'd be a kick in the nuts for him. Like, man, like this technician's leaving me for $3 an hour. So I told Keith that the Gene had offered me 20 an hour, and Keith doesn't actually know this. So if he's watching now, he's gonna be like, damn. But so I tell Keith, I got to leave. This is why. And he respected my decision, but he was just like, I tell you what, he's like, what are you going to make over there at Gene's shop? And I was like, he's offered me 20 an hour, even though he really only offered me 15. But like I said, I didn't want to make Keith feel bad about me leaving. And Keith was like, well, I'll give you $20 an hour. That ain't no problem. At that time, that was the biggest mistake I could have made, was not taking Keith up on paying me $20 an hour, because I could have developed better in my skill set. Keith was talking about opening his own shop. There was a lot of things that Keith had going for him at that point, and I should have, and I regret to this day, not just taking Keith up on that offer. But I had already given my word to the other shop owner that I would be there, and I didn't want to go back on my word. And so I felt really stupid for saying that I was going to make $20 an hour, and then now I'm literally going to another job where I'm making 15. So that was dumb. I have to interrupt here. One part of the story I did forget to say, which did calculate into me deciding to work for Gene instead of continuing to work for Keith, was at the dealership, not only do you get paid flag time, so my $20 an hour was not a guaranteed paycheck, it was flag time. The other problem with the dealership was warranty. At these dealerships, if a job pays 10 hours book time to pull a dash and it falls under a warranty claim, like the truck's got 50,000 miles and the heater core is leaking, the technician only gets paid half of that time. So instead of getting paid the full 10 hours to do the job, which is usually like the bare minimum it takes to do a job, you only get paid 5. So didn't want the question mark next to my paycheck. Decided to go work for Gene. I still regret the decision, but there were some factors that played in there. In the midst of this, I bought my first diesel pickup, which was and I still own it today, it's a 98 Dodge 2500 second gen with the 12 valve Cummins and the 5-speed transmission. And it had 260,000 miles. I loved this thing, but it was a raging hunk of shit and had been neglected for the last 260,000 miles and had every ghetto modification you could have done to it. The headlights were spray painted black. This was back when tinting headlights was cool. Well, you have a 5-candle power second gen Dodge headlight and you spray black spray paint over it. It was so dark that the running lights were brighter than the headlights. I mean, this thing was a pile of crap. It wasn't very long after that I was driving this thing through College Station, going to see my girlfriend because she was in college and I was back home working. And the tappet cover gasket if you know anything about the early Cummins trucks, they have this big old long cover that goes down inside the engine block, about a section about this long, and that gasket fell out. And I'm driving this thing down the road and the oil pressure light comes on. I'm like, what the hell? And I pull over and there's no oil in the engine. I dump a couple gallons in it. I fire it up and it's just dumping as fast as I can dump it in. So we had to get it towed home. My brother came and saved me. It was like 4 a.m. on a freaking Sunday by the time we got back, and we both had work the next day. And I did a tappet cover gasket on that truck by myself. The injection pump on those P-pump trucks weighs about half of what I do. And I get this tappet cover gasket job done, and it blows the gasket out on the freaking test drive. And I'm like, I'm done with this piece of crap. I'm selling it before I ever get started into the diesel world. The motor had a bunch of blow-by. And so I was telling my buddy Nathan, man, we're going to pull the motor and rebuild this piece of crap. And he's like, I read somewhere on a forum that vacuum pumps can cause excessive crankcase pressure. And I'm like, shut up, Nathan. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I'm all pissed off. And because doing a tappet cover gasket on one of those trucks is not easy. It's not a VP44. It's a P-pump truck. They suck. And to top it all off, whenever I first got done with it, the timing slipped. And I didn't know that you could just pull the gear off and reset it. So I pulled the injection pump all the way back out. I hope I'm not going down too many tangents here. I'm going to try and make it make sense. Nathan had told me that vacuum pump could cause excessive crankcase pressure. I didn't believe him. And sure enough, I went out there. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to entertain the idea. It sounds ignorant, but just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it's not possible. So I went out there and found this chicken shit little 1/8-inch vacuum nipple that had cracked in half from age. And I capped it off with my finger, and the blow-by went away. And what was happening is that thing had enough blow-by driving down the road that it would create enough crankcase pressure to blow that brand new gasket out. So anyways, I had to cut my teeth on that truck, and that's kind of what got me started into light-duty diesel, was having bought one of the pieces of crap and having to maintain it so I could make it to work. So let's see where we're at on our timeline here on our paperwork. So I went to work for Gene at Midway Automotive. And Gene cared about the product he provided customers. He always said he wanted, and Gene and Keith were very similar in how they wanted their work done. They didn't want comebacks, they didn't want misdiagnosis, and they didn't want it to look like somebody had ever touched the car. If you open the hood, it better look like it did coming off showroom floor. Between those two guys, I really picked up making sure that you did your job right. So I worked for Gene. Golly, I think I worked for Midway for about a year or so, maybe even longer, as a professional technician. I was paying my bills, living here on the property, fixing up the house. I wasn't making buku bucks. I mean, we're talking $15 an hour. I think by the time that I left, I might have been making 17 or 18. And one day I called Keith because we were working on a 6.4 Power Stroke, and it had exhaust back pressure codes or something like that. And I was looking at the PID data on it, and the exhaust back pressure was showing a vacuum. And I'm like, how the hell, if this thing has a DPF, which it still had a DPF, is it showing a vacuum? The only way that makes sense is if somebody hollowed it out. And I dropped the exhaust down, sure enough, it was hollowed out. And so I called Keith, and I'm talking to him about like what our options are. Keith was like, you about ready to come work for me yet? Because at this point, Keith had opened his new shop in New Braunfels, which was a 45-minute drive from where I lived at the time, or from where I live now. And Keith and I got talking, and he was like, I'll pay you $40 an hour to come work for me. And my jaw about hit the floor. I'd never heard of $40 an hour. Never in my life did I think I'd make $40 an hour. How can I say no to this? Like, I have to try. I'm making 17 or $18 an hour now. This could be my shot. And Keith was like, dude, if you want to make $100,000 a year, just come show up here and put in the effort, and we will make that happen. At this point, Keith's shop had been open just shy of a year. So I knew it wasn't going to go under tomorrow kind of thing. At the time, I thought that fabrication work would be really cool to do for a living. And Keith was like, man, you're my guy. I know you can weld. I've seen your project trucks. I know you're just kind of like a jack of all trades, and I'd like to bring you on and hone those skills. And so I started working for Keith. I decided, you know what, like, I loved working for Gene, but I didn't see it being a career. I thought it was more like a job. Keith's shop seemed more like a career path. This is like I'm working in an actual professional shop that's evolving with the times more versus Gene's shop was like stuck in the 80s kind of thing. So I started working for Keith at the new shop, and I was loving it. I was getting to build custom suspension on like 4 links on Jeeps, and I was doing 5.0 Coyote swaps on Broncos and custom roll cages and all this stuff. But the glamour of custom fabrication wore off pretty quickly. Because Keith's shop was a new shop And because the way that Keith was with how he liked to pay people, he literally, any technician in the shop, I think we were all making $40 an hour. And there was a lot of us. The shop was only charging $100 an hour back then. I don't know how he made ends meet charging that kind of money and working with some of these project vehicles, and they don't make money. We had a string, well, I say we, Keith had a string of comebacks where, because he was a Power Stroke specialist, Keith had worked for a long time at the Ford dealer. His shop primarily specialized in Power Strokes. 6.0s were his bread and butter, 6.4s were bread and butter, 6.7s were fairly new to the market, but we were good at them. And we had, I think I may be exaggerating this, but probably 6 to 10 6.4 Power Strokes come back after we rebuilt the motors on them, and they had cracked blocks. And ARP, they ended up revising the torque spec on the cylinder head bolts. And so you would put these ARP studs in the block, you would crack the block and not realize it until 10,000 miles later, the customer's got a problem with water getting into the oil. And now you've got to eat 10 engines plus the cost of finding blocks and all this stuff. But ARP did, I think, eventually, I know for a fact they revised the torque spec, but I think they backed it down by about 100 foot-pounds. I mean, we were like pulling our hair out, checking the torque wrench settings, verifying that the torque wrenches weren't over-torquing the fasteners. I just can't believe that that didn't put us under. And one day, Keith is just pulling his hair out saying, man, I don't know how. You know, you can't, his favorite saying was, you can't squeeze blood out of a turnip, saying that he can't keep going this way as far as money was concerned, because he had a bunch of technicians that were, unfortunately, at the time, some of them taking advantage of that pay structure where they were getting paid whether they were producing hours or not. They're getting paid to, you know, drag their feet, talking on the phone, texting, all this stuff, making $40 an hour and not producing more than maybe 20 hours a week. And so I brought up to Keith, I'm like, this is my lifeline. If I lose this job, Gene said he wasn't going to take me back. And so I really need this shop to survive. Plus, I really liked working there, and the group of guys we worked with were pretty cool. It was just the coolest job I'd ever had in my life. And so I told Keith, you need to start paying us flag rate, $40 an hour. That's good money. If we get paid by the hours we produce, it'll light a fire under everybody's ass to make money. And that was not going to be the best move for me because I'm the fabrication guy. I can't do a brake job that pays 3 hours in 1 hour. I'm doing a roll cage build that gets quoted at 40 hours, and if I'm lucky, I get it done in those 40 hours. That was my thought behind the only way that we could get that shop to survive, because I saw that people were taking advantage of the situation, and I was just like, we really need to not lose this place. And so I made that suggestion, and Keith decided to change everybody to flag hour. On average, I was a 30-hour-a-week technician, even though I was working 50 hours a week, because I didn't want to misdiagnose something. The way they charged for things there, they only charged, like, it was really rare that you ever got more than 1 hour worth of diag time. And there would be some jobs where you're on there for 8 or 10 hours. And some of it was incompetence because I don't know everything. And I learned a lot of what I know now working there. I never held it against him that I didn't get paid those extra hours. And I'd come in on weekends and holidays and work for free to try and get projects done out the door. And I learned a lot of what I know now from working there. It was what it was. I didn't see where I could make that kind of money anywhere else. But it really sucked whenever I looked over at the dude that was doing front end work and lift kits, and he's making really, really good checks because he has nice repetitive work that's just easy. You don't have to diagnose things. You don't have to build custom stuff. You just take parts off, put parts on, make bank. And I finally sat down and told Keith that I really didn't want to continue doing custom work because I had gotten burned out on it. There was a roll cage on a 72 Chevy Blazer. They got quoted for 40 hours, and I think I ended up having 100 in it by the time it was said and done, because building a roll cage on a vehicle from the 70s is extremely hard to make it all look symmetrical with the body lines, because guess what? It's not square anymore. And it just sucks. I got bills to pay. At the time, I was saving up for a wedding. My wife and I got married in 2018, and then we had our first son in 2020, and I was still working for Keith then. And I was just getting really burned out on not making good paychecks, because at that time, my wife was in school, in college, and I was the only source of income for our household. So my stress level's going up, and here I am having to just work myself crazy trying to make a paycheck doing custom fab work. So we sat down and I told Keith I just wanted to be a technician at that point. I didn't want anything to do with the custom fab work. I need to make sure this is still recording. Oh, that's gonna suck. I promise all of this, I hope at the end like comes together and that all the, I'm not just jabbering, because I'll talk for hours here. So I was having a good time at Keith's until I wasn't doing fab work, and then I started doing just straight technician work with the occasional oddball job here or there. And everything was going good until it wasn't. The shop grew. We grew exponentially. We started in a 5-bay shop, and then he took over the neighboring shop, and then he took over the other neighboring shop, and we just had work coming out our ears. And so Keith hired a shop foreman to kind of take over his position, because Keith is the business owner and he's going 1,000 miles. He's got all these ideas and he's got things to do, and so naturally he needs to hire somebody to take over kind of the day-to-day tasks of managing all these technicians. So he hires a shop foreman, and that dude was really cocky. We had an unfortunate situation that I saw coming to a head. So we had a coworker that is still a friend of mine. People are allowed to lose their temper, and people are allowed to disagree with me, and we can still be friends, right? How you handle your shit is totally on you. But this coworker, just over the years, I saw him getting just progressively more and more. It started with verbal, then it went into shoving matches, and then the last straw for me was when this coworker pulled out a gun over a prank. I didn't perform the prank. I wasn't there when the gun was pulled. I was in my bay doing my own job. But then I heard about it, and technicians were scared enough that they went home for the day. And I thought, okay, well, I like this guy, but it's unfortunately going to be the end of the road for him. And that wasn't the case. They decided not to terminate the employee. They just said, well, y'all know not to mess with the grumpy old man. And I'm like, but he pulled out a gun. That's not cool. It's not like he pulled a gun out and set it on the table. It was like, which one of y'all MFers, put this, did this prank to me? And it wasn't me. It was his helper at the time. And he lost his cool. And that's fine. But I'm not going to be around if y'all are going to keep somebody there that is getting worse and worse. I don't want to be here when it comes to a head and somebody gets injured. Everybody in that shop, we live in South Texas. We have open carry. I've had my concealed carry license for years. I have carried for the past 10 years. Whenever the Sutherland Springs church shooting was, that was one town over from us. And that was enough to make me say, you know what, if you can't go to church and be safe, I'm going to go get my concealed carry license. I got it the next weekend, and I've carried every day since. I have it on me right now. Just a little 380 bodyguard. But anyways, that could have gone a lot worse. Him pulling out that gun, what if I'd been standing there and I felt threatened and I pulled my, weapon and either got hurt or hurt somebody, and then somebody sees me with my gun out, and it's just a disaster of a situation that was there. And so I asked the shop foreman, before I knew that they weren't going to fire him, I said, hey man, like, what are y'all going to do about this? And he told me, he was like, well, you don't have any right to know. And I'm like, are you shitting me? This dude works 2 bays away from me and he pulled a gun out. I want to know if y'all are going to keep him or let him go, because if y'all aren't letting him go, then I'm gone. And I walked up to the office where the boss was, and I knew that he knew that I was upset about the situation. And I walked in the door and I said my piece. We ended up deciding to go our separate ways. I loaded up all my tools that day and came home. And my wife's in college. I got a 1-year-old son. I got bills to pay. I got a mortgage. I got all these bills that I need to pay for, and I don't have a job. But for a very long time, almost since I bought this house, I'd been doing side work. Keith taught me about side work when I worked at the dealer. I started doing stuff in the dirt. I literally did, my first side job was a Dana 80 swap into a second gen, and I went to Harbor Freight and bought an engine hoist because I didn't have one, and I jacked the truck up by the receiver hitch, and I did that axle swap in the dirt in my driveway. And then I graduated from there, and I bought a little 18 by 33 metal shop building off the side of the road, one of those cheap little carports, and we walled off the ends of it. And my roommate and I went halves on doing a slab because he was into automotive stuff too. And then I saved up a bunch of money for me back then, and I bought a 10,000 pound 2-post car lift that's in my shop today still. Challenger 10,000 pound, that thing has been a trooper. And I had been doing side work for so long that about a year before this incident ever happened, I said, man, if I ever needed to go out on my own, I've got work for days. I had side work for 6 months at the house, and I would work till midnight every night when I'd come home from my normal job, and I'd work weekends just trying to make extra money to pay for all the things that I wanted, my mud trucks and my rock crawler and my wife and our wedding and all this stuff. And so I had a client base when I left my job that was side work, and that's where I went to my father when I left in January of 2021, and we started Strataman Automotive LLC, and that's pretty much where we started with the shop. I started working out of my single bay green shop building. But one of the things that always scared me about opening a shop, you have to have a helper. I don't know how some of these one-man shops do it. Because if I'm on a test drive and the vehicle breaks down, if I need help moving a dead vehicle into the bay, if I need help inspecting a front end, bleeding brakes, the list goes on. Hell, if I get hurt, I need somebody there to take me to the hospital, which my helper had to. I had met this kid named Clarence because I worked on his mom's truck, and I think when I met him, he was 12 or 13 years old, and I was expecting this kid to just sit in the truck and play on an iPad or something while I was working on her truck, and he jumps out and he's like, I want to help, and I'm like, hell yeah. And so that's the first time I met Clarence, and I was working on his mom's truck, and he's helping me, and we're fixing it. Then when I finally opened my shop, I immediately went to Clarence, who's homeschooled, and I said, Clarence, how many days a week can you work? And he's like, well, I don't do school, so I can come on full time. So I hired Clarence when he was 14, I think. I would drive 45 minutes one way to go pick Clarence up, drive home 45 minutes. We'd work a full day, and I'd drive him back home. And so I'm spending, freaking 3 hours a day on the road every day picking Clarence up for work. And that worked out for a while. Finally got his license and was able to drive to work, and that saved me a lot of damn time. But we worked out of the green shop for a year total, and I needed an office. And when I bought this property, there was a little bitty shed on the place. I don't know the dimensions of it. I think it's 10 by 12 or 8 by 12, something like that. It was one of those little ones you see like a tough shed at Home Depot. And this thing was pretty run down. So I started my business in January of 21. The winter of 21, which is like the worst one I've ever seen in my lifetime down here. We had just snow on the ground. It was like 0 degrees outside. We lost power for days on end. Water wasn't running. It was pretty bad for South Texas because we're not built for that. Well, I decided I need an office. I drug up this old shed that was on the property here, and my dad, who is very good at construction stuff, helped me remodel that whole thing. But it was in the dead of winter, and I didn't have a building big enough to put the shed in, so I'm building this thing outside. It was miserable. I never want to do it again. And we did everything. I replaced about 90% of the studs in that building. We gutted 100% of the roof and the flooring out of the thing, the walls. We got it down to just only about 30% of the original framework was left when we started actually rebuilding it. And at that point, I was pretty disheartened because it was the dead of winter. I need to be turning wrenches, but I'm building this shed. And it was miserable. But we got it done, and it's still over there. It's the wife's it's our merchandise building now, / the wife's hobby shop. It's a stout little building. I'm really proud of what we did. I'll never do sheetrock again in my life after doing that. That sucked. It did damn well. We used that office for about 2 years. After year 1 of the business, I knew I needed to expand, and I already had built this pole barn. So the area of the shop we're sitting in right now was not part of the shop initially. I had a 30 by 50 pole barn that was 3 bays. It had a 10-foot bay and 2 20-foot bays. And it was initially for just storage. I had an RV at the time. We had a couple of vehicles that we had parked in here. I built the trusses myself. I helped hang the trusses. The concrete for the posts, I poured those with my niece's help. We drilled the holes, we hand mixed the concrete, we did the weld plates for the uprights. I mean, this thing was built by hand. And I had a friend of mine named Matt, a good friend of mine. He owns the Cummins Swapped K30 that you'll see occasionally on my channel. He came and put up all of the other structure. We did a We did a concrete floor, and then we added doors to the building. We added 15 foot on to the building so that it would be, instead of 30 foot deep, because that's not deep enough for a shop, we made it 45 foot deep, which is a little more than you need, but you can never have too much room. So I'm really pretty happy with how it turned out, considering that what I started with was not intended to ever be a mechanic shop. And we have Johnny Cashed this shop ever since then. We did an awning that is 20 by 50. It's just an awning to pull vehicles under. And then we did a lean-to for my motorhome. And then this section we're sitting in here was the latest addition. Cost me like $100,000 to get it done, which is just insane because this is 25 foot deep, 45 foot this way. But it's got the office in it. Whenever the dude building it told me it was gonna be 30 grand to finish out the office, I'm like, oh, you're full of shit. It was 30 grand. But we got a nice bathroom, we got a nice big air conditioned office, we got a nice loft where we can store stuff. I mean, we have to make the most of the space that we have because I don't have infinite amounts of money to build a massive shop. So everything has a place in this shop. Everything is as organized as I can make it. And I've always been that way because when I started in the 18 by 33 shop, you got a 2-post car lift in there and a toolbox, and it's about full. So I had to be really organized in there and make the most of every inch of space to be able to have any amount of tools in there and still work. Paul ended up coming to work for me a year and like 3 months after I opened in January of 21. So it was March of 22 that Paul came to work with me. Now we're going to back up a little bit and talk about Paul's history after high school. So Paul lived with my mom, and Paul knew that he didn't want to go to college. And Paul went, after high school, went to work at a commercial HVAC company in the union. And Paul had a company truck, he had benefits, he had a 401k, he had a good career path. I think Paul stayed there for 4 or 5 years, and he had moved up. Paul's a very intelligent guy, extremely smart, one of the smartest people I know. But if you're not happy doing what you're doing, you need to change something. And Paul, like myself, enjoys turning wrenches. And so Paul left a good career with a good paying job, and he went to work at a local mechanic shop that was pretty much more or less like I started at. Stuck in the 80s, antiquated equipment, just an older style shop, making pennies on the dollar, but he was happy. Paul enjoyed doing that. He put in a bunch of effort, learned things the hard way, did a bunch of research on his own time to better his skill set. If I could go back, Paul and I would both go to trade school for automotive stuff. That would be a huge help for getting us started. But life didn't play out that way. Paul came to work with me in March of 22. At that point, we had already moved into our newer 3-bay shop building that we're in now. Paul had his own bay with a 12,000-pound lift. One of the things that I implemented in my shop when I first started was the same policy that I'd grown up on at all the 3 previous places I worked at. Was if you mess something up because you were ignorant, Clarence dropped a fan clutch and put a hole in a radiator. And I made Clarence buy the radiator because that's the way that I was brought up. I drove a truck and the hood flew open, and I had to pay over $2,000 of my own money to fix the truck, plus all the time to install all the parts. And so I didn't think that making Clarence pay for a $130 radiator was just, I thought it was the way it was supposed to be. Paul said, Ryan, this is not the way you run an automotive repair shop. And I'm like, the hell it ain't. This is the way it's always been. And Paul was like, no, I'm telling you, you're wrong. He's like, I asked on this technician's page on Facebook, and they're all telling me, like, your boss is an asshole and you need to quit your job if he makes you pay for parts. And so that's where the next big change in my life came from. Was I started asking other shop owners in my area, I'm like, well, how would you deal with this situation? And one of them, his name was Corey Hastings, and he owns a Hastings Diesel in San Antonio. He told me, he's like, dude, these are pretty remedial shop questions. You need to join this group called the ASOG on Facebook. And I strongly recommend that if you are not a part of that group and you're a shop owner, you need to go look up the ASOG. It's the Auto Shop Owners Group on Facebook. That place changed my life for the better because it taught me how to be a professional shop owner. You don't pay your technicians flag rate. You don't charge them for screwing stuff up. Like if they screw up enough stuff and they're making you lose money, then you just have to cut them loose. They also taught me how to charge appropriately so that I could pay my employees appropriately. I never thought I'd be able to pay a technician 6 figures, but Paul makes north of $100,000. That's freaking awesome. I never made that kind of money. I think my best year as a technician, even making $40 an hour, I think I made 60,000 or something like that. But even that was a lot of money for me. But Clarence and I ended up coming to, like, our relationship came to an end. We had some problems. Clarence and I are still really good friends. He comes over here all the time. We shoot the shit. He borrows tools, whatever. We're really good friends, but we were just not good working together. And so I am extremely grateful for the time that he put in with me, because I would not be here without him, or things would have been a lot harder. I'll put it that way. So we went through a couple of helpers after Clarence. None of them really fit. And backing up just a little bit, I'm not sure. Yeah, I hired Lacey one day because I didn't have a helper, and I'm like, I don't need a helper, right? Well, that was a lie to myself. But I was driving down the road one day, and I'm running to the machine shop, and I got to go to the injector rebuild place, and I got to go here, and I got to go there. I got 5 hours of driving that I'm doing on the road, and I'm like thinking, like, how much money am I losing by not having somebody to do this stuff for me? And Lacey had already graduated college with a accounting degree, and she was working at a big accounting firm in San Antonio, well on her way to becoming a CPA. And I just got really fed up, and I knew that she wasn't overly happy doing what she does. At least the group of people she was working with, a couple of them were just make life hell. And so I called her, and I'm like, can I offer you a job? She accepted and put in her notice at work. And a lot of people can't work with their spouses, but Lacey and I have been working together for at least a couple of years now, and it I don't have any problems with it at all. It's been amazing, because since she's an accountant, she does all of our bookkeeping, and I don't have to mess with any of that anymore. She can run parts when we need her to. Just nothing but pluses. But then we found Michael, and because Lacey still, there's not enough time in the day to do all the bookkeeping, clean the shop when it needs cleaning. Like, we were just running behind on shop related tasks that need to be done. And I can't expect Lacey to come out here and change the mop water and take the metal out to the scrap pile and just do all these other things that need to be done in the shop, because she's doing bookkeeping and she's running parts and just all this other stuff. So that's where Michael came into the picture. Michael and I went to high school together. He was at least a year, maybe 2 years younger than me. I already talked to Michael, and he said he was good with me talking about all this. Michael was working in the oil field, and at the time had a son and a daughter. And tragically, Michael's 2-year-old son passed away in their backyard in a drowning accident in their pool. I decided that night when I heard about it, I was like, man, I don't really know Michael, because we weren't good friends in high school or anything. But I was like, maybe I could start a GoFundMe. But you always have that thought in the back of your head, well, what if they don't want the GoFundMe, or what if they get mad that you started it, or what if it doesn't go anywhere? I just went and looked up to see how much money we'd raised, because it was back in 2023 that this incident happened, and we ended up raising $28,300. So that was just really awesome that because I really just wanted them to have enough money to be able to pay for the funeral and maybe take some time off for their own healing. And I was just like, here, do with what you need. So at that point, Michael started looking for a job closer to home that he could still make enough money to pay the bills. He wasn't really coming up with anything, and so he went back to the oil field. And a couple of months after that, I called Michael and offered him a job. And I said, hey, I'll pay X amount of dollars. I know this is what I can start you at. I said, if you want to be a superstar technician, I'll pay you this much money. I was like, but I just need somebody to start sweeping the shop, doing this, doing that. If nothing else, it's a temporary position until you can find something better. And Michael has been with us for 2 years now. It hasn't always been great, and I am definitely not the easiest person to work for at times, but Michael's really good at putting up with my shit. And there are days that I'm extremely stressed, and there are days that are a lot better than others. But Michael is by far the best hand I've ever had in the shop, and I hope he's here for a lot longer. If he decided to leave tomorrow, I wouldn't hold it against him. He's been a huge blessing for the shop, and I just hope he's here for a lot longer. So that's Michael's story. They do have a Carter Joe Foundation, so his son's name is Carter Joe Alberthal, and they do fundraisers and benefits and stuff. They had a car show that we attended, not this last year, but the year before, and they raised money to pay for swim lessons for children. So something good came out of all that tragedy. So shifting gears here, we're going to talk about social media and how it changed the shop. When I opened the business, I started a Facebook page for the shop, opened a little Google thing to where we're on Google Maps, and that's about all I ever did with it. I would post random pictures every now and then of something we had come in the shop. Like 5 people liked it, I think, per post, and we only had a few hundred followers at the time, even after a couple of years of having the Facebook page up. And I started a TikTok. My friends would send me videos, and I'd have to open them on the internet browser. It just got to be a pain in the butt. So I was like, you know what? I'll download TikTok, I guess. And I got addicted. I'd post my off-road videos, and then I started posting some of the random stuff we would see in the shop. Like this truck drove in and the tire was going to fall off, and those videos just like would blow up. After probably a year on TikTok, I think I got 10,000 followers, and that's when you can start getting paid. If I had a video that would hit 1 million views, which was quite frequent, I would get $100. And I was like showing Lacey, I was like, look, I made $100 on TikTok. Like, isn't that crazy? You know, I'm getting paid to post stuff. But it wasn't like, I'm not going to retire on TikTok money. But then we started getting up into where we had 80,000 followers, 90,000 followers. TikTok sent me a thing and says, do you want to join the beta program? There was no information about it, nothing. It was just like yes or no. And I'm like, what's it hurt, right? Like I'm only making $100 for 1 million views. And so I clicked yes, and it was like, okay, well now all your content has to be over a minute long. TikTok is short form. Like, what do you mean a minute long? And so then I'm like, I guess my TikTok days are over with. There went my money, and TikTok's like, you can't switch back. So I'm like, well, I'm screwed. You know, I can't make money anymore. And I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll just try and see if I can't make any money posting 1 minute or longer videos. And the first video I posted was 59 seconds long. Like, what an absolute idiot. And it got 2 million views, and I would have made $2,000 on that freaking video if I would have made it 1 second longer. It could have been a 1 second of blank screen. Nothing. What an idiot. But at that point, I was making $1,000 for every 1 million views I got. Didn't really matter the length of the video. If it was a minute or 10 minutes, that was just kind of the average that I was making. And that was like, damn, that's good money. And I always kick myself in the ass for that first video being 59 seconds long. Like, that was so stupid. Anyway, so then we started making money on TikTok. It was a little bit of money, but it's not great, but it's better than nothing. But as the videos get longer, editing them takes longer. So if you look at the amount of time that I spend editing a video versus the monetary gain that I get from it, it's probably a wash at best. I could make that money back if I just took that editing time and worked in the shop. At least back then, that was the return on investment. It was pretty low. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick to it. I enjoy seeing people's dumb responses. I enjoy people commenting that they like the content, whatever. I started getting tagged in Facebook posts about, hey, this dude's stealing your videos and uploading them to Facebook. And it was just all over the place that our videos would be all over Facebook. At the height of it, there was at least 40 fake Straudeman Automotive accounts. Some of them were spelled with one N. Some of them just said straight auto and just like all these crazy random names. And I'm sure there are still plenty of fake pages out there. At the time, Facebook wasn't paying for videos. So I'm like, what is the point of uploading content to Facebook if you're not going to get paid for it? So I didn't care that they're stealing my videos because I was like, there's no point in doing it. And then one day I got tagged in a video, and it was a fake Straudeman Automotive account. Like, it had our logo, it had our business address. It looked like our legit page, but instead of having the 400 followers that our legit page had, it had 10,000 followers. And I'm like, oh crap, this is a problem. People can now get scammed. You know, I could just see all kinds of ways. Yeah, give me a deposit for this fast fuel system I've got on the shelf or whatever. And I was like, okay, I really need to do something, not for me, but for people so that they don't get taken advantage of. So I decided to start uploading my content to our Facebook page, because I was like, well, hell, if people are stealing it and it's getting lots of views, it's obvious it'll do well for us. So I started uploading to Facebook, and then I contacted the Facebook fraud department, and they got all the fake pages taken down, even the one that had 10,000 followers. And then finally, they rolled out the blue checkmark chingadera for the business pages, and I immediately paid for that for the business page and my personal page, so now people can know that it's a verified source. But Facebook blew up in a hurry. I did not expect Facebook to take off the way it did, because I thought in order to get traction, because it was a business page, I thought the only way that people would see our videos is if they followed us. And so I was expecting more of the same, like 4 or 5 likes for a video or something like that. And it was just nuts. Some of these videos have 1,000, 2,000 shares, 6 million views. And then Facebook's like, hey, do you want to start making money? I'm like, well, hell yeah. Once again, the time I invest for the money I get paid, it's a wash at best. But the one thing that came back amazing on Facebook was our workflow. And it's become overwhelming at this point. But before we started posting on Facebook, even when we had 100,000 TikTok followers, I only ever had like 1 or 2 customers ever show up from TikTok with 100,000 followers. Everybody says, oh, we love your content, blah, 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 but nobody ever showed up. When I started posting on Facebook, our workflow just went insane. Prior to that, so the first 4 years of the business had all been just word of mouth. We didn't do any advertising, nothing like that. And we were usually 2 weeks out on work, and we got down to where we were only like 1 day out. And so we decided to get a billboard in town right as we got our Facebook page going, because of the fake pages. The billboard netted zero return. It was $7,000. We only ever had 2 people call that said, hey, we saw your billboard in town, but neither of them came by. So that was a complete waste of time, other than it made for a cool picture. But we had to try it. We were 0 days out on work. I mean, it was just like, what are we doing wrong? When Facebook blew up, that's when our workflow just went through the roof. We were 0 days out. Now we're a week. Now we're 2 weeks. Now we're 3 weeks. And now, a year after Facebook took off, like 16 weeks out or some ridiculous thing like that. I think if we didn't take another client on our wait list, we would have work until February, which is just awesome and overwhelming all at the same time. Most folks would see that and say, Ryan, you're not charging enough money. I assure you we're charging enough money. And then we started the YouTube thing and going to longer form content. So doing stuff like this where it's horizontal and an hour long. It's really fun to do all this stuff. Some of these videos take me 20 or 30 hours to film and edit and upload. And then you're not done when you upload it. You got comments to reply to. There's a lot that goes into managing a social media account across several platforms. A lot of people would also say, well, if you're booked 4 months out, this is your sign to expand your business. While that is a possibility, I don't want the headache of it. Our shop is not large enough to sustain another technician, and to expand this shop anymore for any more bays is going to be, I would venture to say, $250,000. That's just by the time you buy car lifts, extend the shop, spray foam, all this stuff. And then our insurance is going to go through the roof again, because now the cost of the shop is up another $250,000 in insurance. And then I got to pay insurance on a technician. And if I get a technician here that does the work the way I want it done, that's going to be another 6-figure technician. And I don't want the stress. I don't want the headache. And I'm happy where I'm at. We're making good money. I'm not going to have a lake house of my own, but we're making ends meet and trying to keep customers happy best we can. I genuinely hate that we are this far out on work, because I don't get to help people as quickly as I used to be able to. When we were 2 weeks out, it was like, okay, well, if this dude's got an emergency, I can sneak you in and get you done. And these other people that have 2 or 3 spare vehicles, they can wait a day. Well, I can't do that anymore, because now that one person is cutting in front of 50 or 60 other people, and it's just not fair to those people to do that. So we've made the decision to stop taking on new second-gen clients. There's a few reasons. So parts availability is a big one. We had to buy a freaking brake lathe to work on second gens. We just spent 20 hours getting the rear brake drums on a second gen to work properly. I had another second gen in here that the brake shoes for the parking brake, we had to spend 10 hours getting those things right. And that's just the braking system. If you can't buy drums that slide over the hub and have them work, like what the hell? Engine control modules. The last truck that we had in here that needed engine control modules went through 4 different control modules before we got one that worked right. If I never had to do another tappet cover gasket in my life, I would go to the grave just tickled pink, promise you that. And it's not that I don't want to help second gen customers. Like, I genuinely would love to help everybody. One of the other big factors in not taking on new second gen clients, we've already got 100, I'm going to guess, just throw a number out there, say 100 second gen customers that we're still going to service. Like, if you spent money on your second gen with us, we're still going to service it. And that's going to be a full-time job by itself, because these trucks are still on the road and they're still breaking. But I can't take on new clients, because then all I'm going to end up doing is working on second gens for the rest of my life. And I wouldn't care. We've come up with a recipe to fix everything we've ever run into problem-wise on these trucks. But what I'm preparing for is, if I have 2 sons. One of them is 5 and one of them is 3. And if they ever have any interest at all in taking over this shop, I don't want to hand over the reins to a second gen Dodge restoration facility, because there won't be any money in it. And they need to be able to pay their bills. And it's just, we have too much internet popularity to continue down the path that we're on, and then also have the shop go in the direction that I want it to go in. Woo, doggy. Oh yeah, he pissed now. That's the second one I seen running through the shop. It was never my intentions to work on solely second gens, but I kind of painted myself into a corner because I started posting second gen content, which led to more second gen customers seeing that content and then bringing their stuff in. And then we got overloaded with second gens. I want to stay relevant with modern diesels. We are working on a 2025 6.7 flat tappet conversion, which we'll be posting a video soon on. But we have been stuck doing a lot of trucks from 2002 and older. I'll still work on them, because, like I said, we have those clients that'll still be on our lifetime service package. But I don't want to have a yard full of second gens 5 years from now because I didn't decide to make this move now. And I hate it. I hate it that I can't help everybody. And there will still be new second gen content and new products that we come out with for the second gen platform. I'm sure of it. I'll still put out as much new information as I can. That's the other thing, is I don't want to do repetitive content. At some point, you can only post a second gen axle overhaul so many times before people are gonna be like, damn, Ryan, I'm kind of tired of watching you build a Dana 80. And I'm kind of tired of filming them, to be honest, because they take so damn long to film and edit all this stuff. So I need newer vehicles to show the problems that we see with those. That's more or less where the shop is heading. And that's pretty much about all I can think of to talk about as far as the history of the shop, how we got to where we're at, and in the kind of the future moves for us. And our aim has only ever been to produce a quality job, and then we just started filming it one day and took off to where we're at now. So I have no idea where we'll be in a year's time as far as social media is concerned. I never thought that anybody would want to watch us work on vehicles, and so it just absolutely blows me out of the water that this many people follow us and comment and interact as much as they do, and I'm truly grateful for it. So yeah, hope y'all enjoyed this. Hope it wasn't too long-winded, and we'll see you on the next one.